for a lot of these pagan festivals, um, and Ostara is definitely one of them, we already know all about this because Ostara is not separate from Easter, is what I really discovered in my research. In the same way that Yule is not really separate from Christmas. That's really what I discovered. And so, okay, the name Ostara, like Maven, which is the autumn equinox, it really is, sadly, it's a very modern invention, the name for the holiday. It was actually in the 1960s. So this is like Wiccan culture. This is like witches, witchcraft. But the word Ostara is the name of a goddess, a Germanic goddess of the dawn. So etymologically, it probably means dawn or east. So that there was a Germanic goddess, and then there was an Anglo-Saxon goddess, Eostra, that we believe is the etymological root of the word Easter. So really, the information that we have is mostly through these words, these Indo-European type words, but there really isn't a lot of information about these goddesses. So what I really took from, and there's a lot of misinformation, like people confidently speaking about these goddesses when the truth is, like, we don't really have that much to go on. For example, people will say that the rabbit or the hare was sacred to Ostara. And as far as I could tell, we don't actually know that. But what I found so moving about this was this idea that I felt more than ever, more than any, we've been doing these since Lammas in August, more than any other Sabbath so far, I could feel the yearning for information that we have, that they had in the 60s, these Wiccan, witches, and then we have today, and the reason that we're here tonight, like this yearning to know about the goddess in all her many faces. There's this great phrase that some, pagan scholar coined, that it goes, it's the goddess-shaped yearning. So we have a goddess-shaped yearning in our culture, and we're always filling that with anything we can find. So I just was moved by that. I think that, Ostara, Eostra, just because we don't have information about them doesn't mean that they can't be real in our personal pantheon. And they are very real to many Wiccans and modern day pagans. So that was my first kind of take. And then, other themes, really, this Ostara is not separate from Easter. So this is really about resurrection, right? Easter is about the resurrection of Christ, the crucifixion and the resurrection 3 days later. So that, I think we all know that kind of mythos comes up again and again and again across the world. That's not just owned by Christians. That's all over the place. And we'll get into, like, Persephone, for example, we'll get into in a moment. But just as on a real, literal earth-based level, the resurrection that we're talking about is, of course, of the earth itself and of the planting cycle. So the harvest that ended at Samhain led us into the dark of winter, when our indigenous European ancestors would have been surviving off of the stores of what they had from the harvest that they, preserved through means like salting and pickling, or just freezing in the snow in the ice house, or, a root cellar, these kinds of practices. Those stores may have run out by in bulk. And we talked in February about milk and lamb's meat as being milk and cheese, really, and hopefully lamb's meat, if they were lucky, sustaining our ancestors at that time. And now we're moving into, in some parts of Europe, those first sprouts of, seeds were actually planted in February and now are sprouting. First, our Scandinavian or Germanic or more northern ancestors, this is maybe the first seed planting time. So it's really about planting a seed, or it's about sprouting, depending on, what part of Europe we're talking about. And so the rabbits and the eggs that we associate with Easter, these are things that are literally being added into the diet at this time. So these are like wild rabbits, maybe rabbits raised. I didn't read anything about that, but wild rabbits, eggs from hens, but also wild eggs. So eggs foraged in the wild are of many colors, beautiful colors, and a lot of them are edible. We don't eat them today, but our ancestors did. And then things like, like the shamrock for St. Patrick's Day, this is in the sorrel family. So there's all sorts of like little grassy, herby things, many of which are edible that are coming up, and these things are being added back into the diet. So this is the end of scarcity. That's what this time really meant to our ancestors. This is the end of scarcity. This is the, praise God that we've survived, and maybe also some rituals around honoring those who did not survive the winter. So I actually read that, I think it was in Germany, somewhere there was, oh, you know what? No, it was like in ancient Greece and Rome, and then it maybe came west into other parts of Europe, a tradition of placing eggs at grave sites as a symbol of rebirth and reincarnation, or, like the soul's journey after death. So really potent symbolism in the egg at this time. Obviously associated with the divine feminine. Eggs are part of the female reproductive system, but on on an archetypal level, we have this idea of the cosmic egg. So this was a part of Greek mythos and many other traditions all across the globe. This idea that the universe itself was born out of an egg. So this time of year evokes this kind of archetypal energy for us of the cosmic egg. And I have this cool glass egg that I found at a thrift store last year. So I'll use this for kind of like scrying, and I'll meditate on the cosmic egg, which a lot of times is depicted with a snake coiled around it. And the idea is that maybe the egg is the divine feminine, and the snake perhaps is the divine masculine. And the snake squeezes the egg and it cracks, and the top half becomes heaven and the bottom half becomes earth. So this really, really potent archetypal imagery of the egg. And I'll give a plug here about, I will be creating a longer guided journey, a visualization journey that I'm going to put on my YouTube channel. For a while, we were doing them in these temples, but it seems like sharing is so much more important when we're together. So I'll be making a journey this weekend, and you best believe that the cosmic egg will be the main archetypal energy that we're going to work with. So I'll make sure that everybody has access to that, and it'll be like a 20-minute guided journey, and we'll really go into the egg. That's what this time is really about. Let's see. Yeah, in England, we have evidence of customs where they would bury eggs in their gardens or under their barns as tokens, talismans of fertility for the coming planting season and the harvest. Let's see, what else? Oh, Persephone, of course. So one thing I learned, which was interesting, was that probably how did it go? It was like there isn't a lot of evidence that the Celtic people celebrated the equinoxes. There's a ton of evidence that they celebrated the equinoxes in the Mediterranean and in Asia Minor. So one source that I read suggested that, and this is so fascinating, that the kind of like folk awareness of the equinoxes may have been imported to Western Europe with Christianity and with Easter. So there's this way in which Easter celebrations borrowed from Mediterranean paganism, and then that got exported west into Western Europe and into the Celtic world, and they were being Christianized and converted, but it's that interesting part of history where it's like in between. There's still pagan practices being syncretized with Christianity, and it's a time period that like they never teach you about that in school really. Like we just learn about how indigenous European peoples were just conquered and converted, right? And that's really, by the way, what St. Patrick is famous for. If you didn't know, St. Patrick is famous for converting the Irish. He wasn't Irish, he was from Rome, I think. He was famous for converting the Irish by taking the 3-leaf clover and teaching them about the Holy Trinity with the clover. This is the legend. And of course, he supposedly expelled the snakes from Ireland. Well, there never were snakes in Ireland, it turns out. But okay, I digress. So I just love this idea that like it's a mix, it's a mush, it's both Christian and pagan, this particular festival. In ancient Greece, of course, we have the legend of Persephone, which is well known. She spends half the year in the underworld as queen of the underworld, reigning with her husband Hades, and then she spends half the year above. Her mother, Demeter, is an earth goddess. She's a wheat goddess. It is said that the world becomes barren in the winter because of Demeter's sadness over losing her daughter. And this like drama is played out again and again every year. It's still being played out. And so Persephone, her name means bringer of destruction. But that is not the name that she was born with. And that is not really the name that we should call her for the next 6 months now that she's here on the earth plane. We should call her Kore, which just means the maiden. So the maiden. So what we're celebrating tonight is the goddess in her maiden aspect. Some traditions have the meeting of the goddess and the god, their copulation and her impregnation by him that happens every year. Some traditions have that happening now on Ostara. Some traditions see that as happening at Beltane. My inclination, having grown up in New England, is to push that off until Beltane because it's still snowy and kind of barren, and what it feels like to me where I'm at is that the goddess and the god have been betrothed. This is the time of their betrothal to one another. This is the promise that new growth will come, as it has always, as it will always. And when we meet again at Beltane, we'll be feeling more into that marriage between the masculine and feminine, what we call the hierosgamos, the sacred marriage, the alchemical marriage between these fundamental yin-yang energies. In my mind, that feels like something to talk about at Beltane. But do know that it's unfolding. It's beginning to unfold. And interestingly, the Christian holiday of Easter moves around and it falls between these two Sabbats. It falls between Ostara and Beltane. And so this kind of, this is a movable feast, I guess, is what I'm getting at. And I found that, I think, just kind of comforting in a way that things are not as linear as the patriarchal overlords would have us believe. Things are actually quite wild and always have been.